So let's begin this segment with a brief recap. In the first segment, we learned about Hobbes' view of the state of nature. The state of nature is any condition in which there is no government. He thinks when there is no government, there will be competition for resources, there will be distrust between people, and there will be a struggle to seem as vicious as possible in order to cause rivals to back down. All of this together means that in the state of nature, there will be a war of all against all, in which life will be nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes also describes what he calls the law of nature. The law of nature is a rule which prohibits you from endangering yourself. Hobbes' idea here is straightforward. He thinks as a matter of fact, each person's fundamental motivation is his or her own self-interest, specifically his or her own survival. He thinks that given that your fundamental motivation is your own survival, you ought not endanger yourself. So then the question becomes how to get out of the war of all against all. After all, that's the greatest danger there could be to you. He suggests you need to seek peace. You seek peace by giving up some rights. I give up my right to kill you, you give up your right to kill me. More generally, you give up the right of nature. The right of nature is the right to do whatever you want to do in any circumstance. So I give up that right to use you as fuel, say, and you give up your right to use me as fuel, and we've given up some right, but now we can potentially get along. How do we do this? We make and we abide by contracts. How do we ensure that contracts are kept? Well, says Hobbes, we can't simply shake hands and make an agreement because nothing is more easily broken than a person's word. So what do? He says maybe we can look to what animals do, but then he says we're too unlike animals. He then suggests maybe we could have democracy where we sort of just get together and have group decisions about what to do and some sort of group power. He says that's bound to fail, if only because we'll end up disagreeing about what we should do. So then he gets to the suggestion that he prefers. He says we should pick a single leader and give that leader all the power. So let's talk a little bit about how this is supposed to work. So here you have two people, maroon and orange. And Hobbes says this: since we're all born roughly equal, that is, we're all sort of equally capable genetically, the ideal would be to pick the leader by lottery. So give everyone a lottery ticket, have some sort of announcement, and whoever has the winning ticket becomes the sovereign, becomes the king, becomes the all-powerful ruler. Of course, it could be a queen in principle. But Hobbes thinks this won't work. Why won't this work? A straightforward reason. Not everybody gets the same education. Not everybody has the same life opportunities. And we want our sovereign to be educated. We want our sovereign to have had good opportunities and to be correspondingly bright and clever and knowledgeable. Well, where are we going to find someone who's educated? That is, how are we going to exclude people who are uneducated from the pool of people in the lottery, as it were? Well, Hobbes suggests we need to choose the ruler from among the elites. More specifically, he says, we need to choose the person with the very best education. Who is that going to be? It's going to be a child of the current sovereign. So if you have a king, it will be the prince or princess. That will be the person who's best situated to become the next ruler because that person has had the best education. So our poor winner here is going to lose, and we're going to have a new lottery. This time we're going to label people. Either you're ordinary or you're elite. And the more elite you are, the sort of more in the pool more chance you'll have of winning the lottery. Well, the elite gets the crown, becomes the new sovereign. Okay, Hobbes now asks a few questions about picking a leader. First, he says, how does it help to pick a leader? You might think picking a leader won't get us anywhere because people won't agree to do what the leader says to do. Well, here's one straightforward way in which Hobbes thinks it helps. The leader is going to have unlimited rights and power. Put another way, the leader will retain the right of nature, a right retained by no one except the leader. Why is this important? It's important for two reasons. First, it ensures that only one conception of what's best is pursued. Remember, the problem with democracy is that competing people will each have equal right to put forward views on how society should be set up. And those competing people will want their own view for how society should be set up to be the one that's accepted. That means there'll be conflict. If we just have one leader putting forward a view, only one person can say, here's how society should be set up, then there won't be conflict in choosing among different conceptions of society. Second, by having the leader retain unlimited rights and power, and not having anyone else retain unlimited rights and power, we can ensure that contracts are enforced. Now, how does that happen? How do we end up ensuring that contracts are enforced? We'll go over this again in a little bit, but I just want to give you the rough idea now. The leader has all the power. The leader has the power to kill. The leader has the power to modify rights for certain people. So suppose everyone except the leader gives up the right to kill. Well, then the leader can punish deviation from contracts by killing anybody who deviates from a contract. So it's important that the leader retain rights to harm others, because otherwise the leader will not be in a position, and moreover no one will be in a position, to ensure that contracts are upheld. So it's precisely by retaining unlimited rights and power that the leader is situated well to enforce contracts, and situated uniquely well to enforce contracts. Now here's a question, and answering this question can sort of start us down the line to understanding Hobbes' view a little better. Can we change the leader? And you might think it would be easy to change the leader. You might think if the leader's, doing a fairly bad job, people aren't as happy as they could be, then we should change the leader. But here's where you can get some insight into Hobbes' view. He says, under only extreme circumstances is it appropriate to change the leader. So why is that? Here's the first premise. Only contracts allow us to escape the war of all against all. Challenging the leader puts all contracts at risk. Well, you don't want to risk restarting the war of all against all, so you don't want to challenge the leader. So the idea here is very roughly this. So long as the leader is making your life better than it would be were you still in the war of all against all, it would be irrational for you. It would violate the fundamental law of nature that tells you not to endanger yourself, were you to try and change the leader. So let me say that again. If you try and change the leader, you are violating the fundamental law of nature, which says don't endanger yourself. Why is that? Because the leader is getting you out of the war of all against all. If you try and change the leader, you risk throwing yourself right back into the war of all against all. Well, you ought not do that, so you shouldn't challenge the leader. Here's another question that will help give us some insight into what Hobbes' view holds. So what does the leader owe to her subjects? Well, the leader hasn't made any contracts with the subjects. The leader stands outside the contractual system. And remember, it's really important that the leader stands outside the system. Why? Because if the leader made a contract, such as the contract not to kill you if you don't kill her, then she wouldn't be able to punish you for violating contracts you make with other people. Well, the leader hasn't made any contracts, and all obligations originate with contracts, so it follows that the leader owes the subjects nothing. The leader has no obligations to subjects. There's another way to see this. Remember, in other segments, I emphasized several times that until you lay down the law of nature and make contracts, there is no morality. Morally good just means upholding an enforceable contract. Morally bad just means violating an enforceable contract. That's Hobbes' view. There's no justice, there's no injustice until you're in a system in which there are enforceable contracts. Well, if the leader isn't party to any contract, it follows that there's no morality or immorality for the leader. It's impossible, like logically impossible for the leader to do something immoral. And it's logically impossible for the leader to do something morally praiseworthy, because immoral means violating a contract, morally praiseworthy means upholding a contract, and the leader is not party to a contract. Okay, so let's imagine a society here. You have the leader and you have a bunch of ordinary people. One ordinary person says, I give up my right to harm you if you give up your right to harm me. Another says, I agree. Another says, I agree too, and then says, I'll give up my right to this house if you give up your right to that car. So we're establishing private property, and the various people agree. The leader does not agree to any of this. The leader says, I give up no rights. Okay, I can take your car if I want. I can take your house if I want. I can harm you if I want. But, says the leader, for purely practical self-interested reasons, I'll ensure that some contracts are upheld. I won't kill willy-nilly. I won't steal willy-nilly. And moreover, I'll make sure that those agreements that you guys just made are kept. Why do I want to do that? Because otherwise, I risk you revolting. Because if I make things so bad that you'd prefer the war of all against all, you'd prefer to take your chances there, then you'll revolt. And I'll lose my position. And I'll be right back in the war of all against all myself. And I shouldn't do that. That would be irrational. So I need to govern fairly effectively. I need to govern effectively enough to ensure that you'd prefer living in my society than you would living in the war of all against all. So we can now predict how the king will behave. The king will govern fairly well. The king will say things like, I hereby decree that all, except for me and my agents, of course, give up their right to kill, steal, lie, and so on and so forth. Moreover, if you violate one of these decrees, if you violate one of the contracts that you're in effect entering into on my command, then you'll be punished. Correspondingly, you have incentive to keep the contract. And that's how Hobbes thinks we can get out of the war of all against all. We pick a single leader. We give that leader all the power. The leader stands outside the system of contracts. The leader stands outside of society. The leader just retains the right of nature, and only the leader retains the right of nature. And the leader uses that right of nature to squash any violation of contracts, to punish any violation of contracts more severely than the benefit you get by violating the contract. Okay, and that's where we'll end this segment.